My name's Josh. I'm a co-host on The Imperfects, the son of Sri Lankan and English immigrants, and I grew up on and am now raising my children on Wurundjeri country. I'd like to recognise the traditional peoples of this continent whose land was stolen nearly 250 years ago. In particular, we at The Imperfects would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I'm inspired by the strength and endurance of the world's oldest living culture, and we at The Imperfects pay homage to the traditions of story when we share stories on our podcast.
Hello, old chums. Once again, we find ourselves slap bang in the middle of the Academy of Imperfection, a conversational lecture series where experts in their field share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. Today, we welcome fellow Britishman Oliver Burkeman to talk about making the most of your life.
Most of what we do most of the time, in terms of dealing with our time and with overwhelm and distraction and all the rest of it, is mainly a sort of emotional avoidance. It's mainly based on not wanting to really fully participate in that experience of being finite.
So stop thinking about Hugh Grant and join students Hugh, Ryan and Josh in the Academy of Imperfection.
Well, back in learning headquarters, which we call the Academy of Imperfection, and today's lecturer. Well, it's good to see you both. Firstly,
yeah. Lovely to see you. Right?
Don't jump straight into formalities.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, we've already seen each other off the show, but you know, it's weird. Maybe weird for people listening if we're like straight into we're friends. So let's acknowledge that.
Let's. Yeah. How are you?
Good. Really good. Thanks. Really good. Thanks. Now formalities.
After that non-formal.
Well,
greeting.
actually, the guest lecturer that we have today is really thanks to you, Josh. You discovered Oliver Burkeman.
Yeah, well, I'm not the only one who's discovered him. I discovered him for you guys. I think someone else discovered him before I did. But
like a talent scout at a little league game. It's like, who is that kid? He can write.
I had no idea who I was prior to you getting in touch. Yeah.
You ran to the train station, jumped on the phone, like the rotary phone.
Yeah, we must sign this. Sign Burkeman.
I don't know, this kid's got something.
No, I heard you on Sam Harris's podcast, Oliver, and it blew me away. It answered. It's like I had I didn't know I had these questions about my life and the way I was using my time, and it was like the veil had been pulled down on everything I'd been doing, and it was a real sort of rearrange the furniture in my head. Is that an expression?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I just I told these guys about it, and they went and bought the book, and Ryan, you've read most of it and highlighted
most of it.
And I just had to try and get you on the show because I just thought it was such an important perspective on life that you've got. Thank you. Wanted to share it with our listeners. So.
Well, before we hand over to Oliver to teach us all this wonderful stuff, I'll do just a quick background for our listeners. Oliver is a best-selling author and journalist. For many years, Oliver wrote a popular weekly column on psychology for The Guardian in the UK called This Column Will Change Your Life. His work has also appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Psychology's a New Philosopher, and this is where the worlds really collide or stars align, maybe is a better term for this, but twice monthly he publishes The Imperfectionist, an email on productivity, mortality, the power of limits, and building a meaningful life in an age of bewilderment. The book that you were discussing before, Josh, you mentioned before that you discovered for Ryan and myself, 4,000 weeks, the average lifespan of a human. I spent a lot of time with these two men, Oliver, and they have been talking about this book nonstop. So I'm very excited to learn more about it today from you. Congratulations, by the way. It's a New York Times bestseller and named one of the best books of 2021 by the Financial Times, The Times, The Observer, Audible, Time, and Barnes & Noble. So congratulations, first of all.
Thank you very much.
It must be a bloody good book. I haven't got round to it yet. I will. But it must be bloody good.
Well, it's not for me to say, but yeah. Thank you.
It's a hard one to respond to, isn't it?
You don't need to. We've spent 5 minutes talking you up. So,
Yes, right.
So Oliver, it's kind of, I mean, ironically, my anxiety in this episode is that we're not going to get to everything that you like. The irony of it is that I want to get to everything in this book in this episode, but I know I won't. So I have to kind of accept the fact that we will miss out on some of the things that you that you write about, and that's fine. I accept that. But I thought a place that maybe we could start is the fact that your background, like you used to be like what you called yourself like a productivity geek. You were so into efficiency and efficientizing your time, and making the best of your time. Would you maybe talk about that and how that your life was then?
Yeah, absolutely. I still am on some level a productivity geek, but I think I would say now, like in recovery or with some greater degree of consciousness about what I'm up to in those moments. So yeah, I was like always the kid who, I mean, I did pretty well at school, but I had the best exam preparation timetables drawn up, and schedules with coloured felt tip pens and all the rest of it. And sort of continued that on into the context of working as a journalist, which obviously is very sort of relatively high pressure and deadline driven, and there's a lot coming in, and there's this feeling that like what you have to do is get on top of it all. So I've always been a huge sucker for every kind of time management system, productivity system, ways of dividing up the day, ways of organizing your to-do list. But a sort of an upside of that process as a productivity geek was that you sort of go so far along this road that you begin to ask yourself if you're on the right path at all, right? So it once you've tested out 100 ways of organizing your time in the hope that you will finally achieve peace of mind that way, you begin to get it through your thick head that maybe it's not that you just haven't found the right method yet, but that there's some other sort of psychological dynamic going on here. And I think in hindsight, I would say, what I was doing, something everyone or almost everyone does in some way or another, even if they don't become productivity geeks, but it's that sense of trying to find a sort of intellectual solution to the problem that life seems to present, which is that there is too much to do. People seem to be expecting all sorts of different things of you. You might expect all sorts of things of yourself. You might feel very uncertain about the future and want things to feel much more controllable and certain, and not want to feel sort of vulnerable to the fact that anything could happen. All these kind of things that are very deep in terms of the human condition and how we struggle with it. One way of trying to deal with those is to try to feel like you've got the upper hand on time.
On that, I think one word that is sort of like introduced pretty early in the book is the sort of concept of finitude and the finite nature of our time. Of course, like you've called the book 4,000 Weeks, which is roughly the life, which is slightly terrifying when I first read it, but the more I read the book, the less terrifying that became, which I guess is the point of the book. But yeah, would maybe talk about this idea of like finitude and the fact that we obviously have a finite amount of time, but I found that so fascinating how you described that.
Yeah, I think this word is the right one to sort of sum it all up. It does mean in the book, and maybe here, talking a little bit about the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, which is always a problem because it's completely impenetrable. And also, he was a Nazi, so kind of like.
But it's the impenetrable nature which is really off-putting, isn't it? It's the language which doesn't sit well with me.
It has been said of him that he may be the only person in history of whom it can be said that being a Nazi was the least of his problems. But yeah,
it's an amazing autobiography title, though.
But no, I mean the way he talks about this and the way I've tried to sort of. Plunder from that. This sense, firstly, yes, we have a very limited amount of time, but it's not even sufficient to just say we have a limited amount of time, right? Because we know our time is limited, but we don't know how much of it we'll actually get. We live in this state, consciously or unconsciously, of knowing that death is coming. That's just built in to being human. Mostly Heidegger and also the existentialists would say, I think we mostly sort of try not to think about it, but it's sort of there as some undertone. And then furthermore, we don't really have the control over time that we want or even think we do have, right? We're finite in that respect as well. We don't actually get given 4,000 weeks or even 1 week. You just get one moment after another. You just sort of find yourself in time, as it were, and you're sort of permanently vulnerable to events. I think this is a kind of really amazing way of thinking about it that really made a big impact on me. Not that you can't plan and make strategies and prepare wisely for the future, but in a very fundamental way, the very next moment is always completely uncertain. And, you know, it's as true for the president of the United States or Elon Musk, or, you know, it's like there's no level of power or authority you can get that will stop it being the case that, in some sense, anything at all could happen at any moment to you or anybody that you care about. And so, you know, I use that word finitude, I think, in a way that is broadly in keeping with how Heidegger did, but goodness knows, quite frankly, to try to sum up all of this, right? It's our position as completely limited entities with respect to time, not only how much of it, but the control we have over it. And then I think that, you know, from there you can set out this whole argument that I try to make in the book, that we're constantly trying to ignore or avoid the emotional feeling of that finitude. And most of what we do most of the time in terms of dealing with our time and with overwhelm and distraction and all the rest of it is mainly a sort of emotional avoidance. It's mainly based on not wanting to really fully participate in that experience of being finite. It's an attempt to sort of somehow kind of get ourselves out of this river of time that we're in and sort of, you know, look at it from above and determine where it goes and all the rest of it. And it's because that's out of tune with reality that those ways of dealing with time don't really work. So I guess we've dived right into the most sort of abstract level of this now. Maybe we should talk in more day-to-day specific terms for a bit.
Well, I mean, I do want to get to your dating advice later, which I found. I was surprised to see dating advice in 4,000 Weeks, but it's extremely contextual.
Yeah.
But
yes, for about 500 words, and then I stop. I'm not going to do any more than that.
It was worth it. I'm so glad you kept it in. Well, I guess like that idea of time and of finitude, it's another part of the book which really resonated with me was this idea of like, okay, so I'll just read like a line from your book, which is probably going to be much more eloquent than what I was about to say. You need to learn how to start saying no to things you do want to do with the recognition that you only have one life. So, I mean, that idea of like knowing what you, I mean, everyone can go like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't need to do that. But the idea of going, I choose not to do that, even though I really want to do it, that was quite profound for me.
Yeah. Well, firstly, that line that you read is by Elizabeth Gilbert, so I'm quoting her in the book. So
it felt like Gilbo, but yeah,
correct credit. But the point and the idea there is something that I dwell on for quite a while. Right? It's this recognition that one of the consequences of being finite and being characterized by finitude is that there will always be more things that matter in some sense, more things that would have been a completely legitimate use for an hour of your time or a year of your life, you know, than you will be able to do. A lot of the time when people adopt sort of prioritization systems, or they decide that they're going to start saying no much more often in life or something, it's really all part of the same secret agenda. It's right. If I get the right system, I can get rid of all the rubbish and do all the things that matter to me. If I prioritize correctly, somehow magically I can do all the things on the list of the things I'm trying to prioritize. And of course, the real consequence of finitude is no, we're going to have to let go of many, perhaps, depending on how you define it all, overwhelmingly most of the things that we could have meaningfully spent our time on. And that's kind of scary and a bit depressing, because it means giving up ambitions or deciding that some people in your life you're going to disappoint, or some friendships you're going to not pursue, precisely in order to, you know, give other ones the time that they deserve. But in the end, and this, yeah, like you say, I hope that the experience of reading the book is de-stressing. I think it's really ultimately liberating, right? Because when you, in the very non-negotiability of that situation, right? In the very fact that there is no getting out of this, there's a kind of huge relief, because
massive.
Like if that's just the way it is for every single person who's ever born, then it's not on you to solve it. It's nothing to regret in a certain sense. I think maybe there is something sort of poignant and sad about it that is fine too, and that's just part of being alive. But it's that moment when you say, well, oh, okay, I don't need to spend my life struggling to try to do an impossible amount of things, or to please an impossible number of people, or to fulfill an impossible number of ambitions, or whatever it is. And that's exactly when you can sort of pour your time and attention and energy into a handful of things that really matter. So there's two things I'm always trying to emphasize here that I think could be missed. One is, that I think it is relaxing instead of totally panic-inducing in the end. And the other is that I think it's energizing rather than a recipe for like passivity, or for just like, well, why bother doing anything, right? For me, it's the exact opposite. It's like the thing that unclogs the flow, as it were, like the thing that lets me go and do the things that I care about the most is this understanding that I can let go of trying to do everything.
Could you give us some examples of the kind of things that you're talking about that you might want to start saying no to? You mentioned friendships before. Is that certain people that, it would be fun to catch up with them, but...
Well, it's really hard, right? But I think there's a little story in that in the book that I mentioned that is attributed almost certainly wrongly to Warren Buffett, because if wise things are around, people say either Warren Buffett or the Buddha said them. Basically, that seems to be, or Confucius sometimes. But according to this story, he was asked how to sort of set your priorities in life, and he said you should make a list of the 25 things that you think are most important to do or achieve or experience in life, ranked in order from 1 to 25. And then he said the first 5, those are the ones that you should spend your time on. The next 20, which most of us might think, oh, they're the ones I should try to do if I get a bit of extra time that I wasn't expecting or something. But he says no, or imaginary Warren Buffett says no, those 20 are the ones you should avoid like the plague, because they are the ones that exist in this dangerous middle ground, right? They're not the things you desperately want to get rid of in your life.
Yeah.
But they're also not the top 5 that you have real time for. They're all the others. And so in that, I mean, no one can do this perfectly, but in that realm, I'm thinking about, understanding when a friendship has run its course, or some sort of, I don't know, or extracurricular engagement that you do, something you do outside of work, or a sort of leisure pursuit that you thought you liked but no longer do. The effort you put into sort of living up to the expectations of people in your life who's actually you don't mind if you let them down, and there are some people who I really don't want to let down in my life, but there are a lot of others who are like, well, why are they still in my head? It could be anything, right? It could be a hobby, it could be a friendship, it could be maintaining a level of tidiness in your house that actually literally nobody in your life, including you, needs. It's just
that's a big one for me.
And it's really difficult. I definitely don't think I sort of am a perfect exemplar of this, but that's the point, right? It's this idea that something is always that lots and lots of things have a legitimate claim on your time. Now, if you really want to push it further, you could say that actually we're so finite that we might have to choose between things that should all be in the top 5 of that experiment, right? I mean, like, maybe this is cheating because I'm trying to suggest that you can still tell the difference, but I think like the first pass that people could usefully make on their lives would be to do a bit of weeding of those uses of time that are totally good, but not good enough, as it were, and not expect only to be getting rid of things that they hate, because that's just not the way it works. Yeah.
When the pandemic hit and we all had to lock down, and in Melbourne we locked down for a very long time, I found, and this is not to negate, because I know that in saying this, to recognise that a lot of people have gone through a lot of pain and heartache throughout the pandemic and through locking down. But I found a really interesting thing happened to me psychologically, in that I felt like I had been, was like I was running a race and I didn't realize I was running it before the lockdown. And I felt this, I realized that I had all this pressure and I was filling my life with all this stuff of thinking I need to get all these jobs done. I'm in a competition with my friends almost to be as busy as you could possibly be. And then when the pandemic hit and I suddenly couldn't do all these jobs, I couldn't do all these things I was doing, and I basically had to stay home and look after a newborn child, which happened at the same time, I found this incredible sense of peace and satisfaction and harmony and almost of joy that I hadn't realized I was missing out on.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to learn from this. This is great. I feel like I'm doing less. This is a great way of living in it. I've been able to prioritize my life. And right now, I don't think I've ever overcommitted to more. And over the last 3 months, the doors open. We're allowed out into the world, and I decided I'm going to do as much work as I can. I'm going to work harder to get that new, be able to afford a renovation on the house or whatever. I'm going to commit to as much as I can and just fill my life with stuff. And I don't know where that sense of peace has gone. Oh, well, I do know where it's gone, but I don't know how I forgot that lesson so quickly.
Yeah, I think there's at least two really good points there. And yeah, I think that the example that you describe of having choices removed in lockdown and finding, for all the terrible things, that aspects of that experience, that there's something very peaceful and fulfilling about that. And I mean, having a newborn child outside of lockdown might well have led to some of that anyway, because it has that same effect. Like, it's sort of in the broadest sense, it's sort of a crisis, right? It's like you have to attend to that, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's no you don't spend, if you're a minimally decent parent, you don't spend a lot of time wondering if you ought to be spending a lot of your time dedicating yourself to a newborn baby, because it just takes the choice out of that situation. And I think that's anything that takes the choice out of the situation like that has that effect. And it can be like a genuine crisis. It can be something bad happening in your life. Obviously, the pandemic was something bad happening, but I think most people also have that experience of something happening maybe to a friend of theirs, having an emergency or something like that, where it's just very, very obvious that the only thing you should be doing is one thing. And finding that even when there's a lot of suffering involved in those situations, of course, there's something kind of peaceful at the core of them, because there is no question about whether or not you should be using your time for that thing. So this all just adds to this idea that we are sort of tormented in normal times by the sense that we ought to be finding a way to do more things than our time allows. And all that's happening in those moments of non-choice, however they're brought about, is that we're sort of being returned to the actual experience. And if you want to get really sort of Buddhist about it, I think there are people who would say that the experience itself could be, in principle, could be almost anything. It's just the fact that there's a unitary engagement with it, rather than trying to spread yourself over multiple ones. As for hanging on to it, I mean, and losing it so quickly afterwards, I mean, I think that is just a universal experience as well, frankly, coming out of the pandemic. The thing I always want to say there is, like, there's something kind of, there's no need to be so absolutist about that as to think like it's lost forever and you'll never get it back, right? It's like, I think we just chronically do this kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing. And the very fact that you're talking about it now means it's not gone, right? I mean, I'm going through this a bit myself now, right? I sort of, right now feel sort of deeply overcommitted to a certain number of projects, and maybe, like, I shouldn't admit that because I'm supposed to have a perfect grasp of how to meaningfully use my time. But actually, what I have got that I didn't have before and that someone else might not have is not a perfectly organized life, but a tiny little new layer of insight about what it is that I'm doing, and the fact that it won't be the end of the world if I back out of some of those commitments, and the fact that, I can see what I'm up to. I think that's a big part of what we can hope to do in terms of psychological growth. It's not becoming perfect, but it is getting more and more understanding of what it is you're up to when you when you mess things up and cause suffering for yourself and other people. Yeah.
It's kind of like there's one bit in the book which has stuck with me, and I've said it to myself a number of times, quite honestly, like in my normal life, and that is the sort of the opposite. I don't know if you coined this or if this is another Gilbo or Buffett-ism, but the opposite of the fear of missing out. So there's FOMO, which we all know of, which is like, we just want to do everything because we've got this fear of missing out. But the opposite, which is this joy of missing out. Can you, and it kind of connects to what you're just talking about, really, but it's such an easy way to remember it, what was for me.
This seems to have been independently arrived at by several different people, so I claim a bit of credit for it, while also ceding it to anyone who wants it, really. The sort of easy way into it is to say that, like, you know, the more conscious you are of the things you're giving up in order to spend a certain amount of time doing something, then I think it can be argued that the more meaning there is in that experience, right? Because it's precisely because you're aware of what it's costing you in terms of potential other experiences that it has some of the value that it has. So it's this very hard to express kind of feeling that I end up using words like poignancy or bittersweetness or something, right? But it's a sort of ultimately welcome kind of depth to experience that seems to come from being in touch with the reality of the situation, which is that there are sacrifices involved inevitably in doing anything. So the sort of classic example is just, I think about it in the context of parenting, right? It's like being a parent of a small child creates many, many occasions where you sort of have to be giving your time to that undertaking, whether or not you might have had some other thing that you wanted to be getting on with or would have liked to be doing at that time. And to me, it doesn't help to try to ignore that situation. It helps precisely to sort of see that, like, yeah, this is the commitment I made, and these are the things I'm sacrificing in order to do this. And you're making that choice, and that choice, the making of that choice, lends a huge amount of fulfillment and meaning to that experience. So I guess that's all I mean by the joy of missing out, really. Another thing to say about that is just that there's something odd about fearing missing out once you see that missing out is completely unavoidable and that you're going to miss out on almost everything that you could conceivably hypothetically do with a life. It's like, don't worry fearing it. Don't worry about fearing it, because there's this great phrase, then I forget who to attribute it to, but there's a great phrase in sort of from the psychotherapeutic world that, like, the thing you fear the most has already happened. And I think that has a lot of application to what I'm saying in a lot of areas. And here it's that kind of, the ship has sailed. Missing out is just completely structures our experience. And there's huge freedom in that, yeah.
It was the most liberating thing to when it felt like you were telling me, like, personally through the book. It felt like you were saying, stop freaking out. You're not going to do everything you want to do. You're just not. It's like, and it was almost like, I felt almost like it was quite powerful. Like, even in that moment reading it, that was almost like the moment I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to do all these things. And then that's like on a grand scale, but then taking that mindset into just day-to-day things, which might be, I'm not a parent, but I'm in a relationship, and I guess there are parallels in that, which is that often I take for granted my relationship with my girlfriend, with Jam, because it's like, oh, well, I'll see her tonight. I'll see her all the time. So I don't prioritize quality time, and she ends up taking a back seat or playing second fiddle to all these other things that keep popping up, like, oh, lunch with this friend, a voiceover job here, whatever it might be, like different things that pop up. But since this kind of joy of missing out concept, I've much more been going like, I'm just not going to do that thing. And that's okay, because I'm not going to do lots of things.
I find that, and I think this is in the book, I think you've written this exactly, but if you put that over the context of like committing to someone in a relationship for marriage, in the case of marriage forever, if you spend that whole time thinking about all the other people in the world that you're missing out on, so to speak, then you're never going to be able to fully commit to that relationship and get the joy out of the relationship that you could possibly get.
This is the dating advice.
That's the dating advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a profound insight in that it allows you, when you realize that you've committed to something and you are fully into it, that you can extract all the joy and beautiful experience out of it, rather than having your mind elsewhere.
Right. This is the dating advice is just expressing exactly the same thought through the language that people use to talk about dating, and making the point that actually the distinction between what gets called settling and its opposite is not as clear as we make out. That in some sense every decision, and that therefore has to include relationship decisions, is a form of settling, understood in the widest sense, because it involves cost and sacrifice and experiences that you won't have as a result of deciding to commit to that experience. So we talk about, somebody who's in a relationship with someone where we think they could do a lot better as having settled, but we don't talk about somebody who spends 10 years commitment phobically sort of just dating around because they don't want to settle as actually also settling, right? Because they're settling for using their time in that way and denying themselves the things that they're denying themselves there, which could be totally right for somebody at a specific life stage. It's not like an argument for everyone getting married at 18. It's an argument for seeing that we're all just already in this quagmire of opportunity cost, right? It's like every decision to do anything is automatically a decision to miss out on a whole load of other things.
Yeah.
And there's no secret way of holding yourself back from that. You're already in it now. And that's just great, because it means that seeing that means that if it actually is the time in your life to commit, you're not going to have the same sense of loss about doing so, or fear about doing so, because you're going to see that you're already where you are. Doesn't mean that it's right for any given person at any given moment at all. And I just think that whole idea that, to speak to the theme of imperfection and perfection, I've come to understand in my own life, I think that perfectionism, very broadly considered and defined, is has been a sort of total governing force, not just perfectionism in terms of how you do your work, but the sense of being able to sort of make everything work out, being able to please all the people who you think need pleasing, being able to exert a certain amount of control over how things go. We talk a lot about needing to confront the possibility of failure, but it's actually, for me, it's always seeing that by those standards you have already failed. That's the liberating thing. It's it's in the past. The moment you were born, this idea of pristine control, pristine right decisions, pristine ability to do all the things that matter or have all the experiences that matter, it was already off the table. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if there are people who find it incredibly depressing, but I find it great.
On the example of the theme of the joy of missing out, I have been to a couple of weddings recently. We also have a newborn at home, so it's our third child. And I found myself, it's the first two weddings I've been to since we've been, so in the last few years with the lockdowns, there've been no weddings happening. And I've actually noticed now with a baby and our third child, before the pandemic, I felt this enormous expectation, I don't know why, but to be one of the last people at the wedding and to just be there all the way till the end, to make sure the couple would wave goodbye to you, they'd see you there at the end, that you stuck around. And I was at one of my best mates' weddings 2 weekends ago, and with the baby, we had to leave at 10:30, and I felt this huge pang of anxiety of, oh my gosh, we're leaving at 10:30, this is so rude. But we didn't really have a choice with the newborn. And I was in bed by 11 o'clock at night, and I couldn't get the smile off my face. I was like, this is amazing, because I was there
winning at life, right? Going to weddings and getting an early, right.
Yeah, because I was thinking,
sorry.
No, it's exactly what I was thinking. I saw the really important part. It was a Greek wedding. There's going to be a lot of plate smashing after I left, which I kind of wanted to see, but it's okay. I can imagine what happens in that scenario. And I was up the next morning, fresh. I had a good night's sleep. I'd been to my best mate's weddings. I'd been there for the important part. And I just, hearing you speak then, it was a huge, nothing good happens after 11 o'clock midnight anyway. But I always felt like I had to be there for it.
Come out with me one night.
anyway, I felt so much
absolute joke, by the way. Don't come out with me after 11. It's too wild for you. No.
I felt joy. That's what I felt the next morning. I was fresh. I had experienced the best parts of the wedding, and yeah, there was a great joy in missing out.
I thought that really, I can really get it from the example that you give. I can sort of feel it too. And I think it's worth pointing out there on the sort of staying up till the early hours thing, right? What I think is so interesting about this perspective is that it is sort of it is totally agnostic as to the content of experience, right? There might absolutely be some people listening to this for whom who listen to that and for whom the clarifying thought it gives is like, that is why I'm not a parent and why I by choice and why I pursue a life of staying out till 4 a.m. at parties every night. And like that actually genuinely really is at this stage in my life what I want to be doing. Now, it's hard for me to get my head around that particular configuration of a lifestyle at this point, but it's not. It's not ultimately about saying, here's the list of things that are more fulfilling to do than this other list of things. It's about making sure that you're not doing most of what you do out of some notion that you should, or that you're trying to somehow get all the experiences out of being alive, or that you're following some sort of perfectionistic idea that you're going to make it all work in a perfect way.
Yeah, well, in that case there, it's the expectation the unrealistic expectation that I should be there till the end, and you never know what's going to happen. It'll mean a lot to that couple. That's such an egotistical approach. They don't care they won't even notice. They don't know if I'm there or not. And but yeah, it's and I think so many of us fall for that trap of we never really question. We have these unrealistic expectations that we feel are placed on us from others, but we don't really question if they are legitimate, and also are they actually serving us? And I think so often they're not.
Well, I quote in the book Stephen Cope, who's a writer and a yoga teacher as well, I think, who says that at a certain point it dawns on us that nobody really cares what we're doing with our lives, and that this is very sort of difficult and confronting for those of us who've spent our lives to that point trying to conform to what we think is a certain set of expectations. People that quote annoys some people because they think it, firstly, you can think of lots of ways in which a professional life can either help or damage the world, right? I mean, I care what Vladimir Putin is doing with his life and rather wish he wasn't doing it. And also it sort of implies that, or you can misinterpret it to think that spouses don't really care about each other's fulfillment in the way that they claim to. I don't think that's the point at all. Hopefully you've got a few people in your life who care that you love what you are doing with your life, and hopefully you are able to do something with your life that feels close to your something like a vocation or a calling. But this whole superstructure of expectations about what it means to be a sort of competent, successful, professional person. Not only are they sort of over-demanding and contradictory, but yes, as you point out, often enough, we're just imagining it, that other people are holding us to those standards in the first place. And I don't know who I'm quoting here, but it reminds me of that point that the number one thing that will happen if you choose to back out of some kind of commitment that you've made to sort of make things more handleable in your life because you've got too many things on your plate. Like the number one consequence that will happen from that in the majority of cases is nothing. Then in some other cases, somebody may be disappointed or irritated or annoyed, and that's okay too.
Yeah, there's a great line which I've written down. Which, God, I hope you wrote this. I hope this is your quote. I'm 0 from 3 so far, but I'll try it. So it's sort of regarding what you're talking about, and it's sort of talking about. I guess it's talking about sort of this idea of settling and exactly what you were just talking about there, where you might decide to stop doing something in your life or let go of something in your life because you think it's going to make your life easier. So this line is the quality. So this is when talking about a partner, a romantic partner. The qualities that make someone a dependable source of excitement are generally the opposite of those that make them a dependable source of stability. Seeking both in one real human isn't much less absurd than dreaming of a partner who's both 5 and 6 feet tall.
I did write that.
It's stunning.
Very good, very good.
It's great. I mean, I love that idea of the idea of like wanting to find, having this fantasy idea of the perfect partner, and for people who like are constantly dating, and we've got like endless people who are dating now have endless choice through apps and whatever. And so you're always finding the reason why they don't live up to this perfect ideal of a person in your head. So you end up with nothing because you'll never find this fantasy person. They just don't exist, really, not in normal humans.
Right. And I think, sometimes this can get heard as a message that is a sort of a bleak commentary on humanity, or the argument that you can't expect to have a sort of astoundingly fulfilling relationship. And I totally dispute all of that. What it is not really a point about dating. It's a point about the relationship between fantasy and reality. And you can think of it in other domains as well. Things in fantasy are not subject to the limitations of the real world. So like, I think I'm quoting the philosopher Oliver Burkeman, who points out that like one of the reasons we like hoping and looking forward to the future is because the future is a fantasy and limitations don't apply. So it's really easy for me to believe that I'm working towards a situation where I will somehow be able to, be a fully committed parent, dedicate myself to my writing, spend months and months a year on meditation retreats, and like also put more energy than anyone else I know into some kind of political environmental activism or something, precisely because normal limitations of reality don't apply in my fantasy. It's when I start bringing them into reality that they have to sort of collide with each other, and you have to decide where you're going to compromise and where you're going to pull back in order to go forward in other areas. And the same with sort of perfectionism in the classic case, right? I mean, it's very easy for me in an incredibly vague way to just sort of imagine what I want a piece of writing to end up as, because I'm just in my head. It's just like, I can imagine that it somehow is completely perfect and is received completely with pure adulation, or earns me a lot of money or something like that, precisely because the rules aren't there that govern how things work in reality, which is that, you put one foot in front of the other and you win some and you lose some, and you have talents and other things that you're not so good at.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. We often talk on this podcast about like embracing imperfections, but it's also, I guess, in terms of what you're talking about, it's also embracing compromise. In a good way. Like compromise always has felt, I think, in our world as a bad thing to do. Like don't try not to compromise. Try and get everything you want. But in that 500 words about dating advice that you have in the book, from memory, it opens with you should settle, and you should settle as quick as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, I may well say, I think it's, you should settle, and you should, I mean, the thing I'm trying to get at is that you already are settling, right? This is this already thing, which I think maybe actually more since I wrote the book, but it sort of seems to me more and more to be like a good way of conveying what I want to convey. It's like we psychologically hold ourselves back from full engagement with life because we think we are somehow holding ourselves back from the consequences of being finite, but we're already in those consequences. Like it's already happening. There's already just untold millions of life paths I could have taken that I didn't take, and definitely can never again take because of that. And it's all so completely done and beyond my influence that there's just no point in holding yourself back from actually the experience of the life you're in, out of the thought that one day you might manage to achieve that kind of control, because it's already gone.
Yeah, it's sort of been implied in some of what you've said already, but I think me and my wife are both incredibly indecisive, and it really has, reading your work and certainly hearing you talk today, it really re-emphasizes the idea that not making a decision is kind of making a decision because it's using up time, which is that finite resource.
Totally.
You're delaying it, yeah.
Yeah, and you're actually, you've made a choice to use your time probably poorly by being indecisive.
Yeah, right. There's no such thing as indecision. I think that's a really interesting thought and probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's and I realized that relationships is one of the few areas in my life where I was really decisive quite quickly. Like I was fortunate to fall in love very quickly. And
well, she wasn't as decisive. It took a while. Took a while for you to.
That is true. That is true.
There was just a bus driving past and Hugh threw Josh under it. Sorry, Oliver. Yeah.
I'm staying well out of this.
We're brothers, by the way, just if that helps the context.
Helps the dynamic. But it probably speaks to the amount of joy I've had in my relationship in that the decision was made, or it felt like it was made for me in reality, quite quickly. I don't know. That's just an offhand comment.
Right, and this speaks to the sort of interesting findings about the levels of well-being in marital arrangements that are literally made for people in some cultural contexts, right? It's like, I mean, I don't want to necessarily go all out in favor of arranged marriages here, but this is a well-known fact that sort of voluntary, non-coerced but arranged marriage cultures often lead to high levels of well-being.
It's interesting. It's like, I mean, it's you take the choice out of a situation and you're forced to try and make it work. Whether it's like something as simple as like, well, my favorite type of peanut butter was not at the supermarket, so I had no choice. I had to take this brand of peanut butter, and you've got that for the week. You're like, well, you probably just learned to like it because you like peanut butter. So it's like, well, this is all I've got, so I'll just learn to love it. You know, you find the good parts in the peanut butter rather than thinking it's not the better one that you wished you had.
Right, exactly. And the truth as well is that, like, I don't know who said this, but famous old line about how almost every experience in life is either a good time or a good story, right? I don't think it applies to literally everything, but like, even when things go kind of quite badly wrong, like more wrong than not getting the kind of peanut butter that you were hoping for, as long as I'm not talking about tragedies that afflict people here, but like, you know, when things go wrong on any other level than that, the fact that the choice is taken out of it enables you to see fairly swiftly afterwards, like these things very rarely end up being things that you desperately wish didn't happen. I wrote a thing a while ago now. It was when I was living in the States during the first winter of COVID, and people were saying like, well, you know, now that we can't socialize outdoors because of the weather, because in New York there was no attempt to stop people socializing outdoors because of COVID. Now we won't see our friends anymore because you can't go out in the freezing weather and the rain winter. And I just wrote a piece saying like, yes, you can. You just get wet and cold. It's totally fine. And I found these anecdotes. You know, a friend of mine, one of her fondest childhood memories being at a picnic that had just ended up completely like soaked by a rainstorm, and remembering that much more fondly than all the picnics she'd forgotten where the weather had stayed fine. So actually that lack of choice and lack of control about what we're experiencing, once you sort of just like live into it, is
you can find real joy,
just as fulfilling as the alternative.
I just feel like I need to clarify, just when I was talking about the peanut butter example, it is genuinely coincidence that my partner's name is Jam. So that I wasn't trying to do like a slightly veiled. I wasn't talking about jam and replacing with peanut butter. But
I had missed that completely. I assure you.
Yeah.
Anyway, she might not miss it. Though.
You should. All right, okay.
There's a lot of people that might have been listening, going, "He's talking about jam." Like, could have used a non-condiment as that example, but I didn't. Anyway,
right.
Just to take a bit of a slight detour, I hope, just to change subjects a little bit, because I want to get on to something that you
Vegemite.
That really struck a chord with me, and to fill you in, and as I probably bang on about this a bit too much on the podcast, but I find that I have an issue with being sucked into the vortex that is the internet and YouTube and social media and stuff, and I think a lot of people do. And it's especially bad when I sit down to do a task like at work. So if I get to work, I've got a busy day, I've got a lot to do, and I've got some difficult tasks to do, I will very easily go, I'll just quickly check YouTube before I get started and see if any new clips that people that I subscribe to, oh, great, there's a new clip there, I'll watch that, I'll do that. And I'd love you to talk a bit about that process, and then your thing about cleaning your if you turn that off, you might start cleaning your room. I'd just love to hear what you said about that, because it was a real game changer to me, and it sort of made me stop really having a go at myself in the process and thinking I'm useless because I keep getting sucked into this stuff.
Yeah, no, I think I'm glad that it had that effect, because that's sort of what I'm going for and what it's had on me. I mean, we talk a lot about how our attention is sort of being stolen by the attention economy, and I'm at pains in the book not to suggest that I think that's not true. I think there's lots of important issues there about regulation of social media platforms and all the rest of it, and these are designed to grab our attention and then to hold on to it for as long as possible, regardless of whether that suits our sort of higher intentions for our own time. So that's real. But I do also think that we misstate that, because we tend to think about that situation as like, there you are, you're just happily working along on your project or having a really serious, difficult conversation with a partner or something like that. And then just like social media comes in and grabs you away, and you're dragged sort of kicking and screaming into the world of distraction. Whereas, of course, we all know from experience, as you just put it then as well, right, that we run away to those experiences. Like we collaborate with these people who are stealing our attention. We love it. It feels like a huge relief when a bit of writing is getting difficult, or a conversation is awkward, or you're just feeling upset about something. Like there's a really tangible feeling of relief from giving in to digital distractions. And I sort of want to say in the book, like, this isn't a coincidence. It isn't a coincidence that the things that matter to us the most are the ones we're most easily distracted from, even though it seems perverse, right? Because it's like, these are the things I want to do. Why is it then that I end up wasting an hour online instead? No, it's because the things that we want to do are high stakes. They bring us up into this encounter with our limitations. You don't know whether the creative work you're doing will work out well. You don't know if you've got what it takes. You don't know if you've got the time you need. This is something I've experienced a lot, right? You're on a deadline, and that's when you're going to go and spend massive amount of time on social media. Well, yes, because the deadline creates this sense of like uncertainty and doubt about my own abilities. And I also say in the book, like, checking your phone underneath the dining table when you're supposed to be focusing on a conversation with your partner. It's not that the phone distracts you from the conversation. It's that the phone is where you go because the conversation brings up emotions and a sense of vulnerability or annoyance or whatever it might be that you want to escape from. And just seeing that is, I think, really powerful. First of all, as you touched on, it explains why, sure, absolutely set up apps that are going to block your access to social media for a few hours a day. That's great, because they're the most powerful sources of distraction, and then you put them out of reach for a while. But don't expect that to solve this internal problem. You're still going to feel uncomfortable about the thing you're doing and want to go and like make a third cup of tea or clean the kitchen one more time, even though it doesn't need cleaning, in order to avoid this difficult thing. And the best antidote for that, I think, is just to see it, just to expect it, and understand that from experience, that the discomfort involved in that conversation or that difficult piece of work is not going to kill you. It's not even going to be that unpleasant in almost every situation. I love Cal Newport's observation, the author of Deep Work and Digital Minimalism. I love his observation that what some people call writer's block is just a big part of the experience of writing. It's like it's a hard thing to do, and that feeling of hardness is not a sign that something's gone wrong or that you're afflicted by a disorder. It's just what it feels like to do things that matter and are difficult. And I think that generalizes. I'm obviously, giving a professionally close to my heart example, but I don't think you need to be a writer for that to be relevant.
And I thought the analogy that you used was really profound, in that you can, once you realize and recognize the difficult feeling and pain's probably overstating it, but the difficult and unpleasant emotions involved in trying to achieve a difficult task, you can see it like a runner sees trying to run 20 Ks, that there's going to be some pain involved and it's going to be difficult, but at the end there'll be this euphoria and satisfaction of completing the task. And that's just part of the process. And I thought that was such a liberating idea to go, oh, it's not, I don't have a problem here. It's just, that's part of life, this uncomfortable feeling. And the job is to get through it. Right.
And actually sort of falling off the wagon and getting back on the wagon is the thing that you're training, right? And people who meditate tend to understand this. And the cliche is always that people who lift weights, understand it most of all, right? That the failure and resumption is the process of growth and doing the thing. It isn't like it, so that if you were somehow capable of sitting down on a meditation cushion and never getting distracted, the meditation itself would be pointless for you. Like you'd already be some kind of superhuman concentrator. And and then obviously it's more obvious in the case of how muscles get built by sort of reaching a point where they're
but it is
failing.
It is like that idea of the process is, I think like Josh, a big part of it that has really resonated with me, which is, the more we avoid the uncomfortable situations, whether it be while riding or whether it be in, a relationship's not going well because there's a certain issue that the two people are having that you can't seem to get past. Like you could either like break up with that person and end the relationship because that's the easier option and go find someone else who's going to hopefully just be the person exactly who you want and will just not cause you any problems. Or you stick with it and kind of and don't distract yourself. You actually lean into it to a certain degree. And if you can kind of sit in the discomfort, that is like what you said, that is the growing, that is the growth. Whether it be writing, where it's like you got to sit through this really hard thing, and instead of checking YouTube, I'm just going to sit with it, because that's how you become a better writer, and then that's how you become a better partner in a relationship. If you just sit with it and get through it, that has been huge for me as well.
And it's genuinely helped. I still get sucked in massively, and I think, as you said, there's forces beyond my control that once you go in, you're really hooked. Once you do allow yourself to get into that zone. But I have found that in work that maybe a couple of times out of 10, I think, oh no, hang on, this is the struggle. Just sit with it for a few minutes and work through that rather than get distracted. And it's been really a game changer for me. So thank you, basically. Thanks.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah.
I've sort of been fighting this temptation to ask very, not simple questions, but very practical questions around, do you use a to-do list? How do you manage your email? All those kind of things. I heard you say in an interview, it might have been with Sam Harris, I think, where you said the answer to managing our emails is to send a lot less. It's like when they create a freeway and they put more lanes in, it actually makes it more busy because more people flock to those laneways. I love that analogy. Is it all right if I start with to-do list? Do you use a to-do list? Is that something that you prescribe to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to talk about it. The truth is, and I think this is in keeping with what I'm saying. I mean, one of my ways out of the worst elements of productivity geekhood was sort of accepting that there was a sense in which I was always going to be a productivity geek. You see, the overlaps with the 12-step approach to alcoholism are really quite extraordinary here, I find, even though some people might consider that an insensitive parallel. But, I will always want, on some level, like the perfect way to control my time. And seeing that I will always want that is really liberating, because it makes me see, okay, so my system of to-do list is going to be in a constant evolution. And I'm very happy to tell you roughly what I do right now, but literally 2 months from now, it could be completely different. And that's fine. It's the sense that it isn't fine, that I've got to get to the perfect summit of systems that causes the trouble. So yeah, I'm always adapting and evolving.
But probably your acceptance of knowing that you're never going to reach that summit, and that you, now that you know that you're never going to have the perfect to-do system, you're never going to have the perfect thing.
Right.
So it probably helps you because I'm the same. Like I love watching reviews on productivity apps. Like I just love
Yeah.
that. And but it's probably just something you enjoy doing. So it's not like it's this means to an end. It's actually
Right. You're not.
the
Yeah.
enjoyment
yeah.
is the research.
Right. And you don't invest your salvation in it. I mean, this is ultimately, there's something quite religious going on in a lot of what we've been talking about. I think it's this idea that like something's going to save me. Productivity techniques and apps are not going to save me, and that makes it fine to just sort of play around with them. So that's a huge caveat to you and anyone else listening. That's like, if I now tell you that I currently use the great app Things 3 to organize my projects and tasks, I'm not telling everyone else that they need to go and use that app, or that I will still be using it 3 months from now. So that's the sort of core of it. I basically keep a sort of comprehensive list of everything that's on my plate in there. I've then found a lot of power when it comes to focus and getting over procrastination in a sort of absurdly simple system that has a number of different originators, I think, that is quite literally in a hard copy notebook, in a paper notebook. It's sort of embarrassing to even talk about as a method of doing things, which is literally to write one thing down on a list, do that thing, cross it out, and then write the next thing you're going to do immediately below it, and do that thing.
Is that
so you don't write them all beforehand?
No, exactly. Now I do have this comprehensive list on the computer, and I do sometimes then try to sort of break it up into like, well, okay, this is this week's focus, but then I sort of add to that this idea of like, okay, yes, never mind all that right now. What is the thing? And then I suppose the only other element that is worth mentioning there is that I do try most of the time to structure my days so that the first 2 or 3 hours can be on the writing projects that are at the sort of core of my work, and to put off everything else, to adopt this policy of like, okay, I'm going to try really hard to defend a few hours, and I'm just going to go with the flow as much as I possibly can, and with the interruptions and with the email for the rest of that time, rather than attempting to exert control over the whole day, which is counterproductive and impossible anyway, or just trying to go with the flow the whole time, which doesn't quite work either.
So to sort of solidify that into an example, you might have a article you have to write, but you also have like 3 bills to pay. You've got 6 emails you've got to respond to. You've got a shopping to do, and you've got all this kind of stuff. You've got all that on a list. You'll take the article, and you've decided that's the most important thing. You put that onto a separate piece of paper, and you've committed 2.5 hours where that's the only thing you're going to attempt to do, and the other stuff is as out of your brain as you possibly can, and you don't think about those things until that 2.5 hours is done. Is that kind of it?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And if you want to sort of put more of a structure in, I know sometimes I go through phases of wanting to put a sort of structure to the day in between those two things, right? In between, there's the list of absolutely everything and the thing you're doing with this moment. There's obviously a role for many people in trying to give some kind of shape to the day. And I think the most important thing there is that like there is no perfect rule. There isn't some system that solves the whole problem. It's just a question of, some kind of not overly demanding shape to the day there can really help. And one of the things I wrote about for my newsletter was this idea that I've used and will return to, I'm sure, that I call 333, because you've got to give a cool name to everything like this that you try to make proprietary. But which is just this notion that like something that tends to work for me in terms of self-directed time, like in terms of what I get to decide to do with the day. And it's important to recognize that tons happens every day that I don't really get to dictate, but is a good way to think about that is like to do 3 hours work on the most sort of core stuff. And when I say 2.5 with breaks, that is basically 3 hours, to do 3 kind of maintenance activities that keep things ticking over, whether that is to take a long walk, to do email, to I would include the morning pages that I write in, that sort of 3 kind of habits or regular things where you don't expect to finish them, but they just keep everything going the right way, and then 3 like random tasks from your to-do list that have been hanging around for ages that you really need to get done. So like it's not very much. People's general response is like, well, I can't do all the things I need to do if that's all I all I schedule. But then I say, oh, fine, if you end up with tons more time, do more things, that's fine. But like, how's that been working out for you so far? And it probably is, start with this. And so that's something that I do sometimes, but it's very arbitrary, right? It's just like, there is no point thinking that there exists some platonic form of the productivity technique or the day structure. Yeah. It's a question of finding the one that finds that middle point between what you feel you need to do and what you actually kind of enjoy in each moment, because ultimately you have to, otherwise you won't do it.
There was something quite liberating and implied in what you said before for me as well, that when you said you won't find the perfect to-do list or system, it also is good for me to remind myself that no one will, because I always assume that someone else has a better system out there and they're more efficient with their time and they're better. The idea that there isn't one is quite liberating to know that I'm not useless and there aren't better people out there there probably are better people at time management, but there's no one with the perfect system out there.
Yeah. No, I think that's really right. So you're treating so-called experts, absolutely including me, as sort of sources of inspiration rather than as someone you need to find and follow
and copy.
Basically. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good way. I mean, I'm just going to. I feel validated in things 3, so thanks for that. It's also the app that I use, so I know I'm right on one thing.
That is the perfect.
That is the perfect app.
Yeah, exactly.
But Oliver, thank you so much for being our lecturer in the Academy of Imperfection. The book is called 4,000 Weeks: Time Management for Mortals. Did I get that right?
That's right. Yep.
It is honestly, like I was saying before to you, Oliver, I have highlighted more in this book than I think, since like, other than maybe like Johann Hari and Eckhart Tolle books, I probably like this is up there with the amount I've highlighted.
and just so you know, Oliver, just to back that up, Ryan's been overseas for 3 months, and Josh and I would chat to him regularly. We heard more about your book than we did where he was or what he was doing in Europe. So just to further support that.
Well, I say it not necessarily. I mean, like, I want you to know obviously that I'm enjoying it, but I'm passionately saying it because I hope people will read it, because it is brilliant.
Yeah, and we've barely scratched the surface today.
Oh yeah. So thank you so much, Oliver.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk with you today.
Cheers, mate.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Brian Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, filmed by Andy Poole and edited by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support.